the public charge rule is going to be implemented in October of this year. He says some of the benefits and changes to assistance include pregnant women, mortgage loans, student loans, benefits like food stamps, cash assistance, and other benefits will count against immigrants. And that is the concern that a lot of people have about this new rule, which is an extension of a law that went into effect back in the 1800s.
Right.
So let's bring in CBSNews.com reporter Camilo Montoya-Galvez. He is joining us now from our D.C. bureau. Camilo, so you were listening to Ken Cuccinelli. The Trump administration is trying to promote this as a way to promote self-sufficiency amongst immigrants. He used the analogy of his Italian and his Irish ancestors who came to America 140 years ago. Of course, as we know, the current immigration system did not exist for his ancestors when they came to this country. They probably just turned up at Ellis Island or whatever their point of entry was. They made sure they didn't have tuberculosis, and then they came into the country.
Right, and just remember, Vlad, that as you mentioned, this term, the public charge term, was first codified in U.S. immigration law in the late 19th century. You know, this was an era in American history where Congress and really the population here had very restrictive views on immigration. That same year, when that term was codified in U.S. immigration law, the U.S. barred all immigration from China, right, on the premise that immigrants from China endangered certain places of the U.S., right? So, you know,
the Chinese Exclusion Act. You're talking about the Chinese Exclusion Act.
Right. You're right, Vlad. And so, you know, advocates are fearing that this rule, because no one, especially immigrants who might have and speak and read limited English, are not going to read 800 pages of this rule, right? They're not going to know which benefits are included and which benefits are not considered when they go apply for a new immigration status, right? They're not going to know all of this. So they're just going to altogether drop all the benefits they have, including that of their children, most of them who are U.S. born. So that is the biggest fear among advocates, Democrats, doctors, pediatricians I've talked to.
And so, Camilo, tell us, how will this affect legal immigrants that are trying to reunite with their family members?
Right. So this is something that I think it is important that we emphasize, right? This is not a crackdown on illegal immigration. This only affects, on paper, legal immigrants, right? People who are in this country who are not U.S. citizens and who are not green card holders, permanent residents. And it only affects those who go and apply to get a green card, right? To become, hopefully, one day a U.S. citizen, right? So it's not targeted on undocumented folks, although, you know, some parents of U.S. born children are undocumented. It's not directly targeting them. So this is a crackdown on legal immigration, and it's one that the administration believes will help promote self-reliance, self-sufficiency, and success, as the acting USCIS director said in his conference, among immigrant communities.
You know, it's interesting, Camilo. One of the things, again, Mr. Cuccinelli was talking about the idea of promoting this self-sufficiency, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, a mentality that he says is at the core of American values, and including this one point that you will have to prove that you can speak right and read English. But again, if you use the analogy that he used, and I don't know in his particular circumstances, but having studied immigration and migration into this country over the last 200 years, it's pretty clear that many Irish, Italian, Chinese immigrants did not speak English when they arrived at these shores, and many of them were poor. In fact, that, as one reporter pointed out, the base of the Statue of Liberty says, "Give me your tired and your poor." He was asked, Cuccinelli, if we should change that plaque at the base of the Statue of Liberty, because essentially what we're saying here is if you can't pay to be here, then you shouldn't be here.
Right, and this is, you know, one of the biggest concerns is that people say this will punish poor immigrants just because they're poor, right? Many of the benefits that will be included are essential to everyday life. Food stamps for young children, right? Medical care, right? Things like a prescription drug coverage, right, for elderly and for senior citizens. So these are essential benefits, right, that will be considered now by caseworker and immigration authorities to determine, first, if you're eligible for a benefit, but maybe if you are eligible also for potential deportation. So it has really sweeping consequences on legal immigrants here in the U.S.
And Camilo, as Vlad mentioned, this is not a final rule yet. It doesn't go into effect until October. But could anything stop it?
Right. So just to clarify, it is a final rule because the draft had already been submitted to a public comment window, and it received more than nearly 300,000 comments, nearly all critical. So this is the final rule, but it will not go into effect into mid-October. The caveat is, as you mentioned, Meg, is that we expect many groups, even some states governed by Democrats, to file lawsuits against this regulation to try to block it before it is implemented in October.
All right, Camilo, always appreciate your reporting. Thank you very much for taking some time out to shed some light on this new rule. Thank you.
Thank you, Vlad, and thank you, Meg.
You know, I just as a plug, I did a podcast, a CBS This Morning podcast with the president of the New York City Tenement Museum. Have you ever been to that museum?
No.
It's a really remarkable museum, and we spent a lot of time talking about immigration because what it does, the Tenement Museum, it highlights a home in the Lower East Side where successive families have lived. And these are apartments that actual immigrants from Italy, from China, and from Ireland actually lived in. And you chronicle the existence of immigrants in this country and how they sort of live their lives in New York City. And I encourage our viewers at CBSN to go and check out that podcast because he has some really interesting thoughts about immigration.